In 2012, McKinsey Research held focus groups to survey 1,094 Australians. And from this survey, they obtained a list of the top 10 obstacles to embracing Christianity. One obstacle was the perception that many of the forms and practices of Christian churches are old-fashioned, outdated. Then Ruth Perrin did some research about the reasons for millennials leaving the Christian faith. And she found that a major reason was the resistance of many local churches to changing their ways. I think that's very sad. To me, the genius of Christ's gospel is that it demands significant ongoing changes for continuing progress. The work of God to restore his kingdom in the earth is a dynamic movement, not a static institution. A deacon of the First Church of Jerusalem, a man by the name of Stephen, stated as much when he came before a religious court to answer charges of blasphemy. There were two charges against Stephen. Firstly, it was reported, and you'll find the account of these charges in Acts chapter 6, 13 to 14, it was reported that he was publicly challenging the place of the Jerusalem temple in the worship of God, saying that Jesus will destroy it. And secondly, he was also challenging the authority of the laws of Moses to stipulate the way people should live. These were two sacred and sacrosanct traditions of Jewish religion and history. Interestingly, Luke says that the witness for these charges, that person was lying. But if the witness was lying, it must have been because they were only testifying to some of what Stephen said and not putting all his statements in their proper context. Because when the Sanhedrin, the religious court, hears Stephen's own defense at the trial, they're thoroughly convinced that the witnesses were not lying and that Stephen was, in fact, arguing that these two sacred institutions no longer have any relevance, have no longer any place in Jewish faith and life, that they're redundant, that they're obsolete. The main thing that the witness probably didn't say, and should have, to be fair to Stephen, was that Stephen was arguing that it's God who has made these institutions redundant and obsolete, that it is God who's moved past them and is moving forward in a new and dynamic way. He's saying that it's God who is, in a sense, leaving behind or throwing aside the old and bringing in the new. And that if the Jews don't embrace the new, they're going to be left out and left behind. Now, these charges against Stephen are very serious charges, and upon being found guilty, they bring with it the sentence of death. That's in the laws of Moses. Leviticus 24:16 clearly states that this is the punishment for blasphemy. It says anyone who blasphemes the name of the Lord must be stoned to death by the whole community of Israel. Whether they're a native-born Israelite, or whether they're a foreigner. Anyone who blasphemes the name of the Lord must be put to death by stoning. So, that's what they do to Stephen. Now, when you read Stephen's defense speech, it's apparent that he doesn't say a lot about the new ways that the movement of Christ is introducing, that is coming with the followers of Messiah Jesus. Instead, most of his defense refers to the old ways, to the people and places that had a prominent role in the formation of the Jewish nation. Also, Stephen's defense, at first glance, doesn't seem to address the charges against him in a straightforward and direct manner. But there is a theme that's woven in that connects what appears to be a rather ad hoc summary of the ways of God in the past history of Israel. There is present a profound argument about the way God has worked in the past that Stephen then uses to connect those historical persons and traditions with the people and events associated with the birth of this new movement, the church of Christ at the Pentecost festival recently held in Jerusalem. And I would suggest that his main theme is this: God is not confined to or contained by or restrained by a sacred place or building, such as the temple, nor by the old arrangements and the old ways regulated by the laws of Moses. The temple in Jerusalem had a sacred function. It was commanded by God to be built, and it had a sacred function for a specific period and a specific purpose in the past, but it's no longer needed. And Stephen is also arguing that nor is God restrained by a set of good and sacred arrangements, a covenant that he himself instituted. The covenant with Israel, regulated by the laws and instructions of Moses, did serve a special purpose for a special period. But that period is past, and God's moving forward, setting up a whole new set of arrangements, a whole new way to accomplish his purpose of restoring the same ultimate purpose, the kingdom of God on earth. So God is a dynamic God, not a static institution, and he has always been moving and engaging and working with different people in different places in different ways to fulfill his purpose and to keep his promises, to complete the various stages of his plan. So let me demonstrate by summarizing some of the points Stephen makes during his defense. In Acts 7, verses 2 to 8, he speaks about what God was doing with Abraham. So, way before there was any holy place or building, and way before there was any volumes of religious laws handed down by the great founding father Moses, God wasn't sitting around wondering what he was going to do. God was speaking with a pagan man in a pagan land. His name was Abram, in the land of Ur. He led that man from his hometown and progressed his plan without any temple or Mosaic laws, even when Abram was a foreigner coming into a foreign land, having no status, rights, or privileges. And then in Acts chapter 7, verses 9 to 19, Stephen goes on to refer to Joseph. Joseph, Israel's son, and the one blessed by God, one amongst many brothers who became the 12 elders of the tribes of Israel. And God was working with him, blessing those 12 tribes, favoring them in a foreign place, without the temple, without Mosaic laws. God didn't need the temple. He didn't need the collection of laws to achieve his purpose through Joseph, and to cause Joseph and the tribes to prosper while dwelling in a pagan land under the authority of the pharaohs of Egypt. God can't be constrained. He can't be stopped. Then in Acts chapter 7, verses 20 to 43, he moves on to Moses. God comes to Moses and gives him a mission and speaks to him at a very special place that he says, this is holy ground. But Moses is not at Jerusalem. He's in a peninsula in Arabia, nowhere near Jerusalem. There's no temple about. And all he is in this arid desert place where before him is the strange sight of a burning bush. So some of the most important foundational work of God is done. And there is no temple. There is no Israelite nation, and there's no extensive set of laws and regulations. And then Stephen comes to the main issue of the authority of Moses and the place of the original temple planned by David and built by Solomon. And you find this in Acts 7, verses 44 to 50. In fact, it doesn't start with a temple. Moses, the great founding father, builds a tent, a tabernacle. And the tent was a very special place, modeled on a pattern shown to him in a revelation on Mount Sinai in Arabia, before he ever set foot in the land of Israel, had never heard of the city of Jerusalem. And then when Solomon finally does build the temple, God makes it emphatically clear and wants every Jew there to acknowledge and remember that he's never been, is never, and never will be confined or constrained by this special house or building that's been made. It's not the building that is sacred. It is the purposes of God and how he uses the building that makes it special. And the building was only special for the period that it served the function God had for it. If that function no longer is required or to be served, then it's just simply a building. So, Stephen then quotes Isaiah chapter 66, verses 1 to 2, to make this very clear. It says, God's primary place is the universe, where the heaven is his throne and the earth is his footstool. So, a building in Jerusalem is not essential to God. He doesn't need it. Even though Jesus had clearly taught that the temple would be destroyed and replaced, and had also taught that his authority superseded the laws of Moses, Stephen doesn't choose to go there. He actually uses the history of Israel to make his argument. That God can use all sorts of people, programs, places, buildings, all to advance his cause. But it's his purpose that he's accomplishing, and how he does it can continually change. The temple, the laws of Moses, were never essential permanent features upon which God always had to depend, and without which he could not do his work. To the contrary, God was well able to do what he wanted to do in the ways that he wanted to do it, to fulfill his purpose without these institutions which he himself established for that period. So, let's think about this in terms of its implications for us and its applications for the way we gather and worship and witness and serve as a church. What are the implications of what Stephen's saying? Well, let's just work them through progressively. First of all, God is a dynamic being who is on a mission to rescue and restore his creation. Because he's on a mission, he's always on the move, ministering at various and different places through various and different people. We cannot control and manage God by tying him down to a certain tradition or way of doing things, to certain customs and programs that have been useful but have served their purpose. If the temple and the laws of Moses had their time and place, but God moved beyond them and past them, how inappropriate is it for us to believe that God can only bless and work through programs and plans that we've introduced for our own times according to our own ways of thinking and behaving. Secondly, God is working according to his own plan, not ours. And he has revealed those parts he thinks we need to know about. What we know about his plan is only the parts that he discloses, which he does and has done selectively, disclosing what we need to know to follow him and work with him at the different periods of the history of salvation. He disclosed those parts at different stages to different people for different reasons. Some to encourage them to walk with him for a period, and others to warn them that if they didn't do what he was requiring, they were getting in his way. Thirdly, it's very important for us to realize that the permanent, continuing parts of what's disclosed are often very big and broad promises. The detailed organizational arrangements, such as the laws of Moses or the building of the tabernacle or the building of the temple, all those were for a particular period, primarily from the period of spanning from Moses to Jesus. But since the coming of Jesus, since his incarnation, his ministry, his teachings, his crucifixion and his resurrection, and then the subsequent arrival of the Holy Spirit, well, that's a huge turning point and requires a discarding of ways that served up until that time, but coming in and introducing new ways. And that's got profound implications for the remainder of God's mission from Jesus onwards. Fourthly, Jesus' accomplishments and the Spirit's arrival, being pivotal points in the history of what God is doing, sets the scene for a creation-wide, a worldwide work of reconciliation and restoration. Restoration between God and humanity, between human nations and cultures, and between us and our creation, or God's creation. So consequently, there's a need for new and better arrangements that aren't restricted by an Israelite or Israel focus only, but has a worldwide focus and can adapt to many cultures. And so the old arrangements become redundant and are replaced by better arrangements, the new covenant. And the writer to Hebrews says that this has made the old covenant obsolete. And these arrangements are necessary for the expansion and advancement of a worldwide movement modelled upon and led by Jesus and being put together by the Spirit. And those arrangements require much more flexibility and creativity and innovation than the old arrangements, which were very much focused upon the preservation of God's work through the kingdom of Israel. In fact, the new arrangements, or the new covenant, have very little organizational detail. We know about the big purposes, the Great Commission. We know about the big requirements, the Great Commandments. But the rest is all left to our imagination and innovation and industry. And then, sixthly, this means that the Spirit-filled, Jesus-led people are much more important than organizational detail and programs and ministry programs that are taught to us by American Christians. What really matters is not the smart structures, systems, and programs, but Spirit-led people praying with God and working with God. This means that apart from the content of gospel truth and the call to be a Spirit-led community or family, how we organize ourselves for co-working with God needs to be much more flexible and fluid to allow us to respond to the various situations and circumstances that will maximize the effectiveness of God's work in various places with different types of people across the world. If our schemes and strategies, plans and programs in any way hinder us moving with God in mission and ministry in our context, then we should ditch them. Apart from each local Christian community having accountable leaders, facilitating and encouraging missional activity and ministry, no organizational arrangement is sacred and fixed. Apart from the mission of making, baptizing and training disciples, no plan, scheme, strategy, program, tradition, customary way of doing worship, witness or service is fixed and sacred, cannot be changed. If traditional structures or patterns no longer serve a useful or fruitful purpose of making disciples, then they are to be abandoned or amended, just as God was prepared to replace the temple and the laws of Moses, which served for a long period of history. If schemes and programs are no longer serving that purpose and they're not aligned with God's mission, then actually we have a responsibility to come up with new, innovative and creative ways of responding to our commission, of responding to the call of God. So, if we are to be a movement, we need to embrace change that leads to progress, that enables us always to be responding well to the work of God and the purpose of God. We need to stop being so stuck with our plans, our structures and programs, but always constantly reviewing them and realigning them and adjusting them to fit for the purpose of his mission. That's the genius of the new covenant. That's the genius of the gospel, to allow for creative responses while still moving forward to accomplish that age-old purpose that God has always had upon his heart, the mission of God to restore the kingdom on earth. That's profound. That's radical and allows for a lot of ingenuity and creativity, a lot of change towards progress. So, church is not this building. It's not sitting here on a Sunday morning. Church is us, the people of God, praying, worshipping and working together to respond to the work that God is doing in this world in our particular context. That's our responsibility. So worship's not singing songs, but everyday living, serving God in ways that honour him, that raise his profile and bless others with his grace. Evangelism is not an event that used to work many years ago or a tract or a particular way of doing things, but it's that constant, regular, recurring, interacting with non-Christian people in conversation and in life to openly share the grace of God and how Jesus has changed us. Discipleship is not to be constrained by a particular way of reading and studying and applying the Bible. There are many ways that we can do it, but we have to achieve the purpose of growing and training disciples. So in the end, we've got to review all that we do according to the purpose. Are we achieving the purpose? And what is God doing in our context, and how are we responding and connecting the people in our community with the mission of God. That requires constantly being prepared to change. And I think that's the major application of Stephen's message. God is dynamic, is on the move, and he's not hindered or restrained and having to do it a certain way that suited British Christianity or American Christianity or African Christianity. No, God can use various ways, but he wants us to keep reviewing what we're doing to fulfill his purpose. Yes, the church, according to Stephen, according to Christ, is continually to be on the move, making good progress. And to make good progress and to grow, it has to be embracing new ways